The morning sun filtered through the towering windows of courtroom 302, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. Judge James Anderson adjusted his reading glasses, fighting back a yawn as he reviewed the stack of cases before him. His morning coffee sat cooling on the bench, barely touched, his mind drifting to the mysterious text from his son David. "Dad, dinner tonight at Lawrence. 7 p.m. Got someone special I want you to meet." 23 years on the bench had taught James to compartmentalize his personal life, but today was different. David, his brilliant but private son, had never been one for dramatic announcements. The last time he used the phrase "someone special" was during his high school graduation, when he announced his decision to pursue law school instead of the family business. "Next case," James called out, his authoritative voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. He glanced at the docket, noting the name, Dr. Maya Richardson, charged with exceeding the speed limit by 20 miles per hour on Hospital Drive. The clicking of heels against marble flooring drew his attention. A young woman approached the podium, her posture impeccable, wearing a crisp white doctor's coat over a navy blue dress. Her hospital ID badge caught the morning light, and James noticed the words Chief Resident, Emergency Medicine beneath her name. "Dr. Richardson," James began, his tone clipped, "you were caught driving 55 in a 35 zone at 11:23 p.m. last Thursday. How do you plead?" Maya stood straight, her voice clear and confident. "Your Honor, while I acknowledge exceeding the speed limit, I believe the circumstances warrant consideration. I was responding to a level 1 trauma alert." "Doctor," James interrupted, something about her self-assured demeanor striking a nerve. "The court is well aware that emergency vehicles are exempt from certain traffic laws. Your personal vehicle, however, is not." "With respect, Your Honor," Maya continued, unfazed, "I was already at the hospital when the alert came in. I had to rush to our sister facility across town, where we had a specialized piece of equipment necessary for the procedure. Time was critical, and—" James raised his hand, cutting her off again. "Dr. Richardson, while your dedication to your profession is admirable, the law doesn't make exceptions based on occupation. We have protocols in place for medical emergencies, which include proper channels for equipment transfer." The gallery behind Maya stirred uncomfortably. James noticed a few hospital workers in scrubs, presumably her colleagues, exchanging concerned glances. Something in their reaction made him pause, but he pressed on. "Furthermore," he continued, shuffling through the papers before him, "the officer's report indicates that when stopped, you were—" what were the exact words? "Dismissive of the severity of the violation." Maya's composure flickered for just a moment. "Sir, I explained the situation to the officer. The patient was—" "The patient," James interjected, his voice harder than necessary, "would have been better served by proper protocols being followed. The court finds you guilty of the charged violation. Given your position and the example you should be setting, I'm imposing the maximum fine of $500. A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Even his clerk, Janet, who'd worked with him for 15 years, looked up from her computer with raised eyebrows. Maximum fines were rarely imposed for first-time speeding violations, especially in cases involving medical personnel. Maya's expression remained neutral, though something flashed in her eyes. Not anger or resentment, but something deeper, more contemplative. She nodded once, paid the fine on the spot, and turned to leave. As she walked away, James couldn't shake the feeling that he'd missed something important in this interaction. Checking his watch, he saw it was nearly noon. Only a few hours until dinner with David, and this nagging sensation that today would bring more surprises than just his son's announcement. Lawrence Restaurant sparkled with elegant chandeliers and soft candlelight, its reputation as the city's finest dining establishment evident in every detail. Judge James Anderson arrived early, straightening his tie as he followed the maitre d' to a corner table draped in crisp white linen. The gentle notes of a piano floated through the air. but they did little to calm his curiosity about David's announcement. He checked his phone again. 6:55 p.m. David was always punctual, a trait he'd inherited from his father. James ordered a glass of scotch, his customary drink before dinner, trying to shake off the lingering thoughts of his last case that morning. Something about Dr. Richardson's dignified response to his harsh ruling had stayed with him throughout the day. At precisely 7 p.m., James spotted David's tall figure weaving through the tables. His son's face glowed with an excitement he hadn't seen since David won his first major case, but it was the woman beside him that made James's scotch glass freeze halfway to his lips. "Dad." David's voice carried his joy across the restaurant. "I want you to meet Maya, my fiancée." Time seemed to stop. Dr. Maya Richardson stood before him in an elegant emerald dress that had replaced her white doctor's coat from that morning. The hospital ID was gone, but her poise remained unchanged. Their eyes met, and James saw the same contemplative look she'd given him in the courtroom, now mixed with something that might have been amusement. "Judge Anderson," Maya said softly, extending her hand. "What an unexpected pleasure to see you again so soon." David's excitement faltered as he looked between them. "Again? You two know each other." James found himself standing, legal training kicking in to maintain composure. His hand met Maya's in a handshake that felt both formal and surreal. "We had a brief interaction in court this morning." Brief interaction. David's brow furrowed. "Maya, was this about the emergency transfer incident last week?" Maya nodded, gracefully taking her seat as David held her chair. "Yes, though I didn't realize at the time I was meeting my future father-in-law." Her tone carried no bitterness, but James could feel the weight of the morning's events settling over the table like a heavy cloud. The waiter arrived with impeccable timing, offering menus and reciting the evening specials. James barely heard the words, his mind racing through the morning's court session, now seeing it through an entirely different lens. He'd been unnecessarily harsh, letting his mood and preconceptions color his judgment. "I think I'll have the salmon." Maya's voice cut through his thoughts. She turned to David with a warm smile. "Remember our first date here? You spilled wine all over your new tie trying to explain medical malpractice law to a doctor." David laughed, the tension easing slightly. "In my defense, I was trying to impress you. Not every day you get to dinner with a brilliant emergency surgeon who also understands legal precedents." James watched their easy interaction, seeing how his son's face lit up when Maya spoke, how their hands found each other naturally on the table. The love between them was palpable, making his morning's actions feel even more unsettling. "Maya," he finally spoke, his voice softer than its courtroom tone, "I believe I owe you." "Judge Anderson," she interrupted gently, "perhaps we could start fresh. As family." She raised her water glass in a small gesture of peace. The word family echoed in James's mind as he raised his own glass, meeting her eyes across the table. In them, he saw not the defendant from his courtroom, but the woman who had captured his son's heart, whose intelligence and grace were apparent in every gesture. The evening stretched before them, an opportunity to bridge the gap between morning's judgment and evening's revelation. As their main courses arrived, the initial awkwardness began to melt away like butter on warm bread. Maya's face lit up as she described a particularly challenging surgery from the previous week, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. James found himself leaning forward, genuinely absorbed in her narrative. "The patient was a 7-year-old boy," Maya explained, her voice filled with warmth. "He'd fallen from a treehouse, and when he came in, everything pointed to a routine case, but something in my gut told me to look deeper." She paused, taking the sip of water. "That's when we discovered a rare congenital condition that could have been fatal if we hadn't caught it." David watched proudly as his father and fiancée began to find common ground. "Maya's known for her intuition in the ER," he added. "She can spot things other doctors might miss." James nodded thoughtfully, reminded of his early days as a judge. Intuition in medicine, must be similar to what we call judicial instinct. Though, he added with a hint of self-deprecation, sometimes our instincts can lead us astray. Maya's eyes met his, understanding passing between them. Every profession has its challenges with snap judgments, she replied diplomatically. In the ER, we have protocols to help us check our assumptions. One of my mentors always says, the obvious diagnosis is sometimes a deceptive one. The conversation flowed naturally to James's own career journey. I started in the public defender's office, he shared, surprising himself with his openness. Spent 10 years there before becoming a judge. Those years taught me that every case has a story behind it, though sometimes in the rush of a busy court calendar. He trailed off, the morning's events hanging unspoken between them. Time pressure can be challenging, Maya agreed, skillfully steering the conversation. Just last month, I had to make a split-second decision during a multiple trauma situation. 2 critical patients, 1 operating room immediately available. She described how she'd handled the crisis, her dedication to her patients evident in every word. James watched as she spoke, seeing not the defendant from his courtroom, but a highly skilled professional who saved lives daily. Her story about the boy in the treehouse reminded him of David at that age, always climbing things he shouldn't, giving his parents constant worry. David was quite the adventurous child himself, James found himself saying, a warm smile creeping across his face. Did he ever tell you about the time he tried to turn our garage into a courtroom? Maya's eyes sparkled with interest, while David groaned good-naturedly. Dad, please. Oh, I need to hear this, Maya laughed, reaching for David's hand. He was 8, James continued, enjoying the lightened mood. Convinced the neighborhood kids to stage a trial over a missing bicycle. Turned out the stolen bike had been in the Thompsons' garage all along, just buried under beach toys. The story opened a floodgate of shared memories and laughter. Maya contributed her own childhood tales of playing doctor with her stuffed animals, complete with handmade prescriptions written in crayon. As their desserts arrived, a shared chocolate soufflé that David insisted they try, James realized how naturally Maya fit into their family dynamic. You know, she said thoughtfully, stirring her coffee, sometimes the most meaningful relationships come from unexpected beginnings. She glanced at David, then back to James. It's not about where we start, but where we choose to go from there. The wisdom in her words struck James deeply. Here was a woman who could teach him as much as she had learned, whose strength of character showed not in grand gestures but in the grace with which she handled difficult situations, including this one. After dinner, David suggested they continue the evening at his father's house, just a few blocks from the restaurant. The walk there was pleasant, the early evening air carrying the first hints of autumn. As they entered the stately home, Maya's eyes were immediately drawn to James's extensive library. Please, feel free to look around, James offered, noting her interest. Most of these books have been in the family for generations. David excused himself to make coffee, leaving James and Maya among the floor-to-ceiling shelves. Maya ran her fingers gently along the spines of leather-bound law books. First editions of Blackstone's commentaries, she asked, impressed. I studied these in my pre-law courses before switching to medicine. James raised an eyebrow, intrigued. You were pre-law. For 2 years, Maya nodded, pulling out a chair near the fireplace. But during a summer internship at a law firm, I spent some time in the hospital with a client. Watching the doctors work, seeing how they could make immediate, tangible differences in people's lives. It changed my path. James settled into his favorite armchair, the leather creaking softly. What did your parents think of the switch? They were surprised. Maya smiled, her eyes distant with memory. My father's a retired judge himself. Actually, he had similar reactions to certain cases as you did this morning. Her voice held no accusation, just understanding. James felt the weight of the morning's court session return, but differently now. You remind me of someone, he said slowly. A public defender I worked with in my early days. Sarah Martinez, brilliant woman, never backed down when she believed in her client's cause. I learned more from opposing her in court than I did from any law book. What was your most memorable case with her? Maya asked, genuinely curious. James leaned forward, warming to the memory. It was a case involving a young doctor, actually. He'd broken speed limits rushing medicine to an elderly patient during a snowstorm. Sarah argued that sometimes human necessity should outweigh strict interpretation of the law. He paused, the irony of the situation not lost on him. She won that case. And what did you learn from it? That justice without compassion is just rigid rule following, James admitted. I seem to have forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way. Maya's expression softened. We all have moments where we fall short of our own ideals. In the ER, I've made snap judgments that turned out to be wrong. The key is recognizing it and doing better next time. From the kitchen came the sounds of David preparing coffee, the familiar domestic noise providing a gentle backdrop to their conversation. You know, James said thoughtfully, David's mother would have liked you very much. She had the same way of teaching through gentle guidance rather than confrontation. Tell me about her, Maya asked softly, as James shared stories about his late wife. Her wisdom, her kindness, her ability to see the best in people. He felt something shift in the room. The morning's courtroom tension dissolved completely, replaced by a deeper understanding between two people who, despite their different paths, shared core values about justice, compassion, and the importance of growth. When David returned with coffee, he found them deep in conversation about the challenges of maintaining humanity in high-pressure professions. The sight of his father and fiancée finding genuine connection brought a smile to his face. This was more than just making peace. This was the beginning of a true family bond. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes to courtroom 302. Judge James Anderson's morning routine remained the same, straightening his robes, reviewing cases, sipping his coffee. But his approach to justice had shifted noticeably. On a busy Tuesday morning, a young mechanic stood before him, charged with working after hours in a residential zone. Instead of immediately citing noise ordinances, James asked, "Tell me why you were working so late." The mechanic explained how a single mother needed her car fixed for her morning hospital shift, and he'd stayed late to help. James nodded thoughtfully, remembering Maya's stories about healthcare workers and their daily challenges. "The court appreciates your dedication to helping others," James declared. "Instead of a fine, I'm ordering you to register your after-hours emergency repair service with the city. This way, you can continue helping people legally." The mechanic's relieved smile reminded him of Maya's words about making immediate, tangible differences in people's lives. During lunch, Janet, his clerk of 15 years, commented on the changes. "You seem different lately, Judge." More what?" James asked, reviewing the afternoon docket. "More like when you first started on the bench," she replied. "Remember how you used to say every case was a story waiting to be heard?" James smiled, thinking of his conversation with Maya in the library. Sometimes we need reminders of who we meant to be. That afternoon, a case particularly touched him. A grocery store owner faced fines for leaving food out for stray cats behind his shop. Instead of simply ruling on the health code violation, James listened to the full story. The man had been working with a local shelter to humanely trap and rescue the cats, helping reduce the stray population while showing compassion. "The law exists to maintain order," James stated, "but also to serve our community. I'm ordering you to coordinate with the health department and animal shelter to create a proper feeding station. Let's turn this violation into a solution." The following week, Maya joined him for lunch in his chambers, a new tradition they'd started. She brought sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria. "Not as fancy as Lawrence," she joked, and they discussed their respective cases. "A teenager came in yesterday," Maya shared. "Skateboarding accident. But something in his story felt off, so I dug deeper. Turned out he was living in an abandoned building, practicing there, because the skate park had closed." James leaned forward, interested. "And what did you do?" Connected him with social services, yes, but also reached out to the community center. They're looking into converting their unused basketball court into an indoor skate space. She smiled. Sometimes the solution isn't just treating the immediate problem. You've taught me that, James admitted. Yesterday, I had a landlord-tenant case. Instead of just ruling on the eviction, I asked about the underlying issues. Discovered the tenant lost his job due to medical bills. We found a way to connect him with job placement services and work out a payment plan. Maya nodded approvingly. Small changes can create big ripples. As they finished lunch, James shared his latest initiative, creating a resource guide for court staff about local community services. Every case that comes before me is an opportunity, he explained, not just to apply the law, but to understand and help where possible. David told me you used to be called the people's judge early in your career, Maya smiled. Looks like that title is making a comeback. James felt a warmth in his chest, realizing that his transformation wasn't about becoming someone new, but rather rediscovering the judge and the person he'd always meant to be. Wedding preparations transformed the Anderson home into a hub of activity, with sample cards, flower arrangements, and venue photos scattered across every surface. But it was the quiet moments between the chaos that truly cemented their growing family bond. One evening, as Maya pored over hospital administrative reports at the kitchen table, James entered with a concerned expression. "Maya, I could use your perspective on something," he said, settling into a chair beside her. "Had a case today involving a medical insurance dispute. The details remind me of that emergency transfer situation from when we first met." Maya set aside her work, intrigued. "What's troubling you about it?" "The hospital's policy seems reasonable on paper, but in practice." He shared the details, watching as Maya's expert understanding of both medical protocols and patient needs illuminated aspects he hadn't considered. "You know," Maya said thoughtfully, sketching a quick diagram on a notepad, "we faced a similar challenge last month in the ER. Sometimes the system doesn't account for real-world complexities." Their discussion flowed naturally, blending legal and medical perspectives. When David arrived later, he found them surrounded by notes, deeply engaged in solving what had evolved from a single case into a broader discussion of healthcare access in their community. "Should I be worried you two are plotting to revolutionize the entire legal and medical systems?" David teased, dropping a kiss on Maya's cheek. "Your father actually helped me with something today too." Maya smiled. "Remember that policy proposal I was struggling with? His insights about liability concerns helped me reshape it completely." James beamed with quiet pride. These evening discussions had become precious to him, watching Maya's brilliant mind work through complex problems, seeing how her compassion always guided her decisions. She reminded him so much of Elizabeth, David's mother, in her ability to balance professional excellence with genuine care for others. The next weekend, while David handled wedding vendor meetings, James invited Maya to help organize Elizabeth's old study, untouched since her passing 5 years ago. As they sorted through books and papers, James shared stories that brought Elizabeth to life for Maya. She kept every single one of David's drawings. James chuckled, holding up a faded paper with a child's interpretation of a courtroom. Said they belonged in a museum of future legal genius. Maya carefully handled each item, understanding the trust being placed in her. "Look at this," she said softly, pulling out a journal. She was writing about healthcare advocacy in underserved communities. James nodded, moved by the discovery. Elizabeth was always fighting for better access to justice. She would have loved seeing how you approach patient care, Maya. Always looking beyond the immediate symptoms to help the whole person. As they worked, Maya shared her own family stories. Her father's influence on her early interest in law, her mother's encouragement to follow her heart into medicine. James listened intently, seeing how these experiences had shaped the remarkable woman his son had chosen. "You know," Maya said, carefully placing a photo of young David back on the shelf, "when I was in medical school, one of my mentors said that the best doctors are also good listeners. I've found that's true in family too." James understood the deeper meaning in her words. Their relationship had grown from that awkward courtroom encounter into something precious, a father-daughter bond built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. That evening, as the three of them shared dinner, James watched Maya and David discussing their days, finishing each other's sentences and laughing at private jokes. He felt profound gratitude for this unexpected gift, not just a daughter-in-law, but a true partner in his journey to become a better judge, a better father, and a better person. The garden of the Anderson estate bloomed with white roses and lilies on the morning of the wedding. Gentle spring sunlight filtered through the old oak trees, creating natural spotlights on the carefully arranged chairs and flower-adorned archway. James stood in his study, adjusting his bow tie for the 10th time, his father of the groom's speech carefully folded in his pocket. A soft knock at the door revealed Maya in her wedding dress, a vision of elegance that made James's eyes mist over. "I hope I'm not breaking tradition," she smiled, "but I wanted to speak with you before the ceremony." "You look beautiful," James managed, thinking how proud Elizabeth would have been of this moment. David is going to be speechless. "That would be a first," Maya laughed, smoothing her dress as she sat down. "I wanted to give you something." She handed him a small, wrapped package. "I found it while organizing some old hospital records." James carefully opened it to find a framed newspaper clipping from 15 years ago. The headline read, "Judge Anderson's landmark ruling improves hospital access for underserved communities." Below was a photo of a much younger James standing on the courthouse steps. "That ruling," Maya said softly, "it's why our hospital was able to open its satellite clinic in River Heights, the clinic where I did my residency, where I learned that medicine isn't just about treating symptoms, it's about healing communities." She touched the frame gently. "You were making the difference in my life long before we met." James stared at the clipping, memories flooding back. "I'd almost forgotten about this case. It was one of those moments when the letter of the law and the spirit of justice aligned perfectly. And now here we are." Maya smiled, "about to become family. Life has a wonderful way of bringing things full circle." The ceremony itself was intimate and moving. Under the oak trees, David and Maya exchanged vows they'd written themselves. When Maya promised to build bridges of understanding and heal more than just bodies, James saw several of his fellow judges in attendance nodding appreciatively. Then came time for James's speech. He stood, taking in the faces of gathered friends and family, medical colleagues and legal peers, all united in celebration. "When I first met Maya," he began, drawing knowing smiles from those who knew the story, "she stood in my courtroom. I made a judgment that day, and I was wrong." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. "But Maya taught me something profound, that true justice, like good medicine, requires us to look deeper, to understand the human story behind every case." He turned to the newlyweds. "David, your mother always said that love is the best teacher. Maya has proved that by helping me become not just a better judge, but a better person. She hasn't just joined our family. She's enriched it with her wisdom, her compassion, and her remarkable ability to see the best in people." Maya wiped away tears as James continued, "In my courtroom, we seek truth and justice. But Maya showed me that sometimes the greatest truths come from being willing to look past our first impressions, to open our hearts to new understandings. My son has found not just a wife, but a partner who makes him strive to be better every day, something she seems to do for everyone fortunate enough to know her." As James raised his glass for the toast, he caught Maya's eye. In that moment, they shared an understanding that transcended their initial meeting, a recognition that sometimes life's most challenging moments can lead to its greatest blessings. 1 year after the wedding, the Anderson Center for Legal and Medical Ethics opened its doors in the heart of the city. The elegant brick building, with its modern glass facade, stood as a testament to how one unexpected meeting could spark lasting change. James and Maya stood together at the podium during the opening ceremony, their journey from that first courtroom encounter now a story that inspired others. The center's main conference room buzzed with energy as medical students, law students, and practicing professionals gathered for the inaugural seminar. When my daughter-in-law first stood in my courtroom, James began, sharing a warm glance with Maya. I thought I was simply handling another traffic violation. Instead, that moment began a transformation that would affect countless lives. Maya stepped forward, her professional confidence now familiar to James. What started as a challenging encounter has grown into something extraordinary, she added. This center represents our shared vision, that understanding between the legal and medical communities can create better outcomes for everyone. The center's first initiative, a mentorship program pairing young doctors with legal professionals, and vice versa, had already garnered national attention. Medical students learned about the legal implications of their decisions, while law students gained insight into the real-world challenges healthcare providers faced. Later that afternoon, James observed Maya leading a workshop on emergency medical ethics. She used their story as a teaching tool, demonstrating how quick judgments could overlook crucial context. Her students were especially moved by the case that had brought them together, the emergency equipment transfer that had earned her a maximum fine. Sometimes, Maya explained to her attentive audience, what seems like a simple violation of rules is actually a complex human situation requiring deeper understanding. The key is to find solutions that serve both justice and compassion. In his own sessions, James shared how his perspective on justice had evolved. He'd implemented new procedures in his courtroom that encouraged deeper examination of circumstances, particularly in cases involving medical professionals and emergency situations. His fellow judges had begun adopting similar approaches, creating a ripple effect throughout the legal system. David, who had become a dedicated advocate for healthcare law, often joined them at the center. He'd established a pro bono program helping patients navigate complex legal and medical challenges, inspired by the intersection of his wife's and father's professions. One evening, as they finished a long day of seminars, James found Maya in Elizabeth's old study, which had become their shared workspace at home. Photos from the wedding now sat alongside Elizabeth's books, old case files mingled with medical journals. "I found something interesting," Maya said, holding up a dusty journal. "It's Elizabeth's notes on a healthcare initiative she never got to complete. Look at this passage." James read the familiar handwriting. "True justice and healing must work hand in hand. Our communities need bridges between law and medicine." "She would have loved this," James said softly, gesturing to the center's brochure on the desk. "Sometimes I think she somehow knew that one day our family would help build those bridges." Maya smiled, touching the journal gently. "Earlier today, a student asked me if I regret getting that speeding ticket," she laughed. "I told her that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as challenges." James nodded, remembering that morning in court that felt so long ago. "You know, I've presided over thousands of cases, but that one changed my life the most. It taught me that justice isn't just about applying laws. It's about understanding stories, seeing the bigger picture. And now we're helping others see it too," Maya added, gathering her things for home. One story at a time. As they left the study, James paused to look at a new photo on the wall. Himself, Maya, and David at the center's opening, their smiles reflecting not just family pride, but the joy of creating something meaningful together. What had begun as a moment of misjudgment had blossomed into a legacy that would touch countless lives for generations to come.